Last week marked 5 years since Donald Trump was elected president in 2016. Now even more of his allies are facing investigation from Congress, but only if the Biden administration will force them. The House Capitol Riot Committee is issuing 10 new subpoenas for Trump advisors, the most notable being former White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany and senior advisor to the former president Stephen Miller. The committee accuses both of spreading false information about the 2020 election. They now join former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, who publicly discussed seizing voting machines and invoking national security powers to stop President Biden from taking office, and lawyer John Eastman, who reportedly wrote a legally dubious memo on how then Vice President Pence could use his power to hand the Electoral College vote count to Mr. Trump. But almost 3 weeks ago, Congress voted to hold former White House Chief Strategist Steve Bannon in criminal contempt for failing to comply with his subpoena. If Attorney General Merrick Garland does not prosecute his case, other Trump allies will likely see no reason to share testimony or documents. It is shaping up to be a consequential choice. Will the Biden administration dig into the past or let it go? The choice could have significant effects on Mr. Trump's potential aspirations to run for president again. CBS News chief Washington correspondent Major Garrett has been there since Donald Trump descended the golden escalator in 2015, and he joins us now. Major, thanks very much for being with us. Let's first of all take a look at how things have changed in the political landscape and the Republican Party in the past 5 years since Donald Trump's 2016 victory. So I want to play 2 clips, one from the former president's celebration speech and one from his 2020 election night defeat.
Now it's time for America to bind the wounds of division. Have to get together. To all Republicans and Democrats and independents across this nation, I say it is time for us to come together as one united people. It's time. I pledge to every citizen of our land that I will be president for all Americans.
This is a fraud on the American public. This is an embarrassment to our country. We were getting ready to win this election. Frankly, we did win this election.
So, Major, a simple but very big question. What changed over half a decade?
So, let's go back to election morning, the day after Election Day 2016. As I wrote in my book, Mr. Trump's Wild Ride, the speech that President-elect Trump delivered was not the one originally written. The one originally written was much more influenced by someone whose name you just mentioned, Stephen Miller, than a top campaign communications advisor to President-elect Trump. It was a much harsher, more divisive speech, and President-elect Trump looked at it and said, no, I want to have a much more harmonizing message. Kellyanne Conway got involved, and Jared and Ivanka Trump got involved, and they rewrote the speech that we heard a clip from just a moment ago, which by any measure, Elaine, was exactly what you would expect any surprise winner of the presidency to say. Speaking to all parties, it's time to bind our wounds, come together. Unifying, rallying speech, very traditional, if you might say, for an untraditional candidate. And then you can ask yourself the question, did President-elect's transition and presidency live up to those words? In many respects, it didn't. He became more and more dependent on and attached to his political base, much less tolerant of those who disagreed with him, either in the Democratic Party or his own Republican Party, and more wedded to the idea that fighting his way through political difficulties was not only the only way, but the best way for him to achieve results. And that brought us to election night 2020, when the results began to turn against him. And what did the president decide to do? To fight. And on what basis did he decide to fight? The fraudulent allegation that the election was stolen from him. And this was not a new assertion on the president's part. He began to say that in the summer of 2020. The only way I lose is if it's stolen from me or if it is rigged. So the president began tampering with the fundamental aspects of American democracy even before votes had been cast and counted in the 2020 race. And what's the greatest irony here, Elaine, is that on that morning in New York City, when he assumed the mantle of president-elect and gave that very unifying speech it was also a close contest in many states. Hillary Clinton, the presumed winner and the favorite going in, called and conceded, setting in motion the transition of power that was recognized by the outgoing Obama administration and was brought in so the president-elect could prepare to govern this country. He deprived President-elect Biden of that. He did not participate actively in a transition. He dragged his feet towards setting that transition in motion, and every step of the way, from election night forward to this day, he denounces an election he clearly, legitimately lost, and lost handily. 7 million in the popular vote. And yes, there were some swing states that were close, but many of them were not as close as the swing states he won in 2016. So the narrow victory he embraced as a landslide in 2016, he rejected in 2020. And it's something he will never be able to run from. It is something that he will be judged harshly for the remainder of his political life, and that the Republican Party, and this is the consequential aspect of the post-Trump era, is still dealing with, trying to figure out a way to talk about policies and talk about an agenda while still giving some degree of legitimacy, though none exists whatsoever, to the president's persistent, malignant lie that that election in 2020 was stolen from him.
So, Major, on that point, during our election night coverage last week, we spoke about how when Republicans were doing well, there was little to no talk of the election system being broken. So what does that tell us?
Well, it tells us one thing, that Republicans are fully capable of embracing an election system provided they're satisfied with the results. And what results satisfy them most? Their victory. Those two things should be separated and separable in our society and our democracy, Elaine. That you can have respect and allegiance for the system of counting votes, casting and counting, and the ultimate result. You will certainly be happier when you win, but you don't denounce the system that produced a loss simply because you lost and embrace it only when you win. That is a non-functioning approach to democracy. And right now, Republicans are toying with that non-functional approach to democracy.
Well, let's dig into the influence on Republicans, specifically retiring Congressman Adam Kinzinger, a vocal Trump critic. So he was asked about the price that Republicans will pay for enabling former President Trump, and he said, quote, "I think in the short term, there will be no price they will have to pay. I think in the short term, stoking division, using the fear and darkness, will win the midterms in 2022. In the long term, this will destroy the GOP, or it will destroy the country, because this is an unsustainable path." Major, is that a view that any Republicans who are sticking by the president share?
No, it's not. And they believe that what the president really means is we ought to tighten up the election system. We ought to make sure that any difficulties or irregularities, that's their preferred word now, are ironed out of the system. But that's not what former President Trump says. Former President Trump says the election was stolen from him. He calls it the fraud of the century, the crime of the century. And he persists in saying things happened which didn't happen. And all the audits and all of the evaluations, Georgia, Arizona, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and the like, have shown over and over again that, yes, there might have at the margins been some votes that were miscast or erroneously counted, but nowhere near the volume that would overturn an election in any state, let alone enough states to alter the result of the 2020 election. And saying something that is manifestly untrue about something that is so important does only one thing, Elaine. It sows doubt, and it creates, as I said before, an axis upon which the only way an election can be judged legitimate is if one side complaining about it emerges victorious. That is not sustainable in our country. And for now, Republicans will comfort themselves in that unreality. They live in this political netherworld that cannot be explained or sustained over the long run. It can with a base that wants to believe it. And that Trump base does want to believe it and does believe it. And that's a real potent force in Republican politics. It can be dealt with if you tell the truth. But if you refuse to tell that hard truth, you're going to have to live with the uncomfortable lie. And that's what many Republicans, for whatever various political reasons that they justify to themselves, have decided to do.
So given what you just laid out, Major, how critical is this decision from the Justice Department under President Biden on whether or not it will prosecute in order to enforce the House Capitol Riot Committee's subpoenas?
It's important, but it will, even if the Attorney General makes that decision and it goes forward, I fully believe that Steve Bannon's legal strategy will be to try to run out the clock as long as possible. And by that, I mean run out the clock for him and thereby run out the clock for everyone else if they can, who also is in this subpoena chain. Steve Bannon and those close to former President Trump have made a very rough and somewhat cynical calculation that this committee is established by the majority of the House of Representatives. If that majority changes in the midterm election, the new majority will cancel that committee and therefore cancel all of its subpoena powers. The idea is to run out the clock, challenge this legally in every direction imaginable, so when the midterm comes and this remains unresolved and legally challenged and Republicans take over the House, upon their assuming that majority, they cancel this committee, cancel the subpoena power, and lo and behold, all this specter of legal maneuvering and punishment or implied punishment evaporates with it. That, I believe, is the approach that they're going to take, calling it illegitimate and partisan all the way, but meanwhile trying to run out the legal clock in order to wait until such time as the legal pressure is lifted because a new majority is in charge.
All right, Major Garrett, these are consequential times. We thank you very much for your analysis. Thanks, Major.
Thanks, Elaine.